Breaking news. Western nations are pleased to have China represented at the peace talks in Ukraine. However, tensions between Beijing and European countries persist. As a result of China's participation in a summit in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, last weekend, European officials felt a modicum of relief. The conference was called for the purpose of negotiating an end to the fighting in Ukraine. China's presence at a meeting to which Russia claims it was not invited has, according to some sources, sent a message to the international community that it is not willing openly to pick Russia's side against the West, even though Beijing did not budge from its stated position of impartiality. While Russian President Vladimir Putin did not get everything he wanted, this was a win in the diplomatic world of zero-sum games. A senior EU official told CNN that China's support of the meeting will be a major disappointment to Russia. They had never expected China to move fully to the Western position, the official continued. We see clear signs of China's engagement with the West, communication with the Ukrainians, and resistance to Russian influence. That's fantastic news, the official said. This opinion has been shared by several European publications. The continued economic, diplomatic, and security ties between China and the West mean that, while China's engagement with the international community may be a blow for Russia, it is still viewed with suspicion by Western allies. Beijing has not appeared to scale back ties with Russia, despite the optics of its delegation attending in Jeddah. In a phone call to his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov one day after the Jeddah talks wrapped up, Beijing's top diplomat Wang Yi reiterated Beijing's impartiality in the conflict. Even during the war, the two countries' armed forces have continued to train together, most recently conducting a naval patrol off the coast of Alaska. Russia's media have reported that President Putin plans to visit China in October after receiving an invitation from President Xi Jinping in March. According to the same high-ranking EU official, there is little pressure on China to end the war beyond Beijing's relations with its economic partners abroad. Russia's status as an already subordinate partner is further diminished in their eyes because the United States is preoccupied with other issues. The only negative aspect is the impression it gives of China abroad. The tension between China and Europe is well known at this point. In the eyes of Chinese leaders, European nations are fair game in the struggle for global dominance between Beijing and Washington, so this is bad news, according to officials. It's also no secret that a number of European countries, especially those geographically close to Russia, are uneasy with China's close ties with Russia and have caused a re-evaluation of Europe's relationship with China. According to a European security source quoted by CNN, China's key objective is to maintain ambiguity in the European position, so that Europe does not go as far as the US would like. It is more difficult for hawks to pull Europe away from China if economic ties are kept open. Russia's efforts to bring Europe closer to the United States have likely prompted Jeddah. China will feel compelled to re-engage on the Ukrainian issue. Policy Fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations Alicja Bachulska concurs. The Chinese government is currently engaged in a campaign of public relations damage control. China is currently on the sidelines and plans to remain there for the foreseeable future. Participation in such a gathering is highly consonant with this strategy, especially in the absence of Russia. This is great news for the naive people out there who think China can actually change the world. When it comes to what is arguably the EU's most complicated but important international relationship, China's arrival at the table hasn't shifted the dial in Brussels. Multiple officials told CNN that Europe's relationship with China is in a holding pattern while the continent strikes a balance between its needs and its wants. Europe is still extremely reliant on China, as evidenced by the fact that it imports far more from China than it exports. More than doubling from 2020 levels, 2022 saw a trade deficit of €396 billion, $436 billion. But this has occurred as European enthusiasm for committing to formal treaties and agreements has waned. After nearly a decade of negotiations, in which an agreement in principle was reached, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment has been put on hold because China has punished European Parliament members for criticizing China's human rights record. In 2019, Europe's official stance toward China shifted, recognizing Beijing as a systemic rival. Since 2019, Brussels has implemented a series of policy initiatives with the express intention of challenging China's dominance in Eurasia. According to a European Union official who spoke with CNN, the EU has not yet solidified its position on China. Jeddah is a welcome statement, but it won't change the game. Since the beginning of the war, we have hoped China would take this kind of action. After all, as the official explained, human rights, Beijing's threatening stance toward Taiwan, and state-sponsored corporate espionage are all factors that must be considered alongside this positive development. Brussels can view its various gripes against Beijing through the lens of China's action or inaction on Ukraine. Europe relies on China in some areas, but also views the country as a security risk and a malicious actor on the global stage. Indeed, China has hosted the leaders of France, Germany, Spain, and even the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, in recent months despite the difficulty of relations between the two countries. Brussels has lofty goals, including combating climate change, being at the forefront of technological innovation, and pursuing a foreign policy independent of the United States. The European Union, EU, avoided having to choose between the two major powers to the east and west by instead choosing to strengthen its economic ties with China while maintaining its relationship with the United States. The goal was to bring China closer to European values on issues like climate change, the international rules system, and human rights. In 2023, European officials recognize the danger of becoming too reliant on China and recognize that China poses a significant threat to European security. They recognize, however, that they may require China's assistance if they are to accomplish their lofty goals. In the future, we will rely heavily on things like low-cost electric vehicles, solar panels, and steel for wind farms. Sam Goodman, from the China Strategic Risks Institute, says that these are things that China can produce cheaply and already has a head start on, in terms of becoming a major provider for the international market. Goodman adds that smaller European states may be tempted by Chinese money for large infrastructure projects given the region's current economic outlook. From nuclear power plants to highways and water utilities, China has historically been keen to buy up or heavily invest in European infrastructure projects, he explained. Europe's position has changed recently, but countries in economic distress may be tempted to accept aid as a quick fix. The officials have repeatedly raised broad security concerns. According to CNN's citing of senior EU security sources, China remains a primary source of cyberattacks, with a particular focus on corporate espionage. Others argue that Europe is wary of becoming too dependent on any one supplier for energy or other resources in case China becomes even more forceful in its own backyard and becomes a full-fledged international pariah, as was the case with Putin's Moscow. In light of these security concerns, Europe's international ambitions, and China's global ambitions, it may be difficult to determine what each side hopes to gain from their future cooperation. I don't think China has given up on Europe just yet. According to Charles Parton, a former first counselor to the EU delegation in Beijing, it hopes it can still turn the heads of sufficient European countries to stop America running away in the battle over new technology. They have lost on things like Huawei recently and will be desperate to remain competitive on semiconductors, AI, all the things that will matter a lot in the coming years, he says. It's trickier in Europe. Brussels, according to officials, is set on avoiding a total break with China while maintaining the United States as its closest ally. They claim that it will be able to accomplish its global goals without becoming overly reliant on China, while also cooperating with China on some of the world's most pressing issues. It's a bold move, but it puts a lot of its own fate in the hands of the universe. Or at least in the control of a country that has deteriorated so much as a partner to Europe over the past decade.